The great algorithm had never made an error. For 3,000 years, its quantum processors had calculated the perfect path for every species in the galaxy. The Altrians mined their crystal cores on schedule. The Velkons studied their assigned star systems without deviation. The Rith maintained communication networks with mathematical precision. Everything followed the plan. Thais adjusted her crystalline headpiece and reviewed the morning reports. As the Altrian representative to the Galactic Council, she had witnessed centuries of flawless predictions. Today should be no different. The algorithm had scheduled a routine first contact meeting with a newly discovered species called humans. The calculations showed they would accept designated colony world Kepler-7, establish mining operations within 50 years, and integrate smoothly into galactic society. The first sign of trouble came at 847 Galactic Standard Time. Error code 7749 Alpha, announced Prime Calculator, the station's central AI. Probability matrix experiencing anomalous fluctuations. This frowned. Error codes were theoretical constructs, referenced in ancient manuals but never actually encountered. She pulled up the diagnostic display and stared at the impossible readout. The algorithm was showing calculation loops, recursive errors, and something labeled as undefined behavioral parameters. The source of the chaos walked through the airlock. At exactly 0900 hours, David Reynolds looked ordinary enough. 2 arms, 2 legs, forward-facing eyes like most predator species. His delegation of 12 humans scattered across the reception area with no apparent formation or hierarchy. Some examined the crystalline walls with obvious curiosity. Others started conversations with the Rith translators. One human actually sat down on the floor and began sketching the architecture. "Welcome to Omega-7 Station," this said, following the prescribed first contact protocol. "I am Thais of the Altrian Collective. The Galactic Council has prepared 3 suitable worlds for your colonization. Each offers optimal resource distribution and minimal environmental challenges." Reynolds smiled, an expression that made Theis's probability sensors flutter with uncertainty. "Thank you for the warm welcome. Before we discuss colonies, could we see how your society actually works? We're curious about your decision-making processes." The algorithm immediately flagged this as a deviation. Standard protocol called for grateful acceptance of offered worlds, not questions about governmental structure. Thais felt her first flutter of unease. "Our great algorithm calculates optimal outcomes for all member species," she explained. "It has eliminated war, resource conflicts, and social inefficiency. Perhaps you would prefer to review colony world specifications while we process your integration parameters?" "Actually," said another human, a woman named Torres, "we'd like to see this algorithm in action. How does it handle unexpected situations?" Prime Calculator's voice crackled through the speakers. "Warning, unable to model current interaction patterns, requesting additional behavioral data." Thais had never heard Prime Calculator request anything. It simply calculated, predicted, and reported. She led the humans to the central command chamber where massive holographic displays showed the algorithm's constant stream of galactic management data. Trade routes, resource allocation, population movements, all flowing in perfect mathematical harmony. "Impressive," Reynolds said. "But what happens when something goes wrong, when the unexpected occurs?" "Nothing goes wrong," Thais replied automatically. "The algorithm accounts for all variables. But what if someone just decides to do something different?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Thais felt her crystalline structure vibrate with confusion. The concept of arbitrary decision-making without algorithmic guidance was as foreign to her as spontaneous combustion. "Different how?" she asked. Reynolds walked over to a control panel displaying current cargo ship movements. 17 vessels were following optimal flight paths between systems, their routes calculated for maximum efficiency. What if that ship there decided to take a longer route because the captain wanted to see a particular nebula? "That would be inefficient," Thais said. "Why would the captain desire inefficiency? Maybe he finds it beautiful. Maybe he's never seen that particular nebula before. Maybe he's having a bad day and needs something to lift his spirits." Prime Calculator's processors hummed louder. Error messages cascaded across auxiliary screens faster than Thys could read them. The algorithm was trying to incorporate concepts like beauty-seeking behavior and emotional decision-making into its models and failing completely. Your species prioritizes aesthetic experience over optimal resource utilization? Thys asked. Sometimes, Reynolds shrugged. Depends on our mood. The cascade of errors became a waterfall. Mood-dependent decision-making broke several fundamental assumptions of the algorithm's behavioral modeling systems. Thys watched in fascination and growing horror as probability matrices collapsed throughout the central display. Another human, an engineer named Rodriguez, was examining the quantum processors with professional interest. Your system assumes rational actors making decisions based on complete information and consistent preferences, he observed. What's your error tolerance for irrational behavior? 0, Thys whispered. Irrational behavior is impossible. All actions serve survival and efficiency imperatives. Rodriguez laughed, a sound that made Prime Calculator's speakers crackle with feedback. Oh, you definitely haven't met humans then. Last week I spent my entire salary on a painting of a cat wearing a space helmet. Completely irrational, totally worth it. The great algorithm experienced its first complete system crash in recorded history. Emergency power flickered on as backup systems struggled to maintain basic station functions. Alarms blared throughout Omega-7 as 3,000 years of predictive modeling collapsed into quantum static. The holographic displays went dark, then flickered back to life, showing nothing but error messages in 17 different languages. Thys stood frozen, her crystalline structure pulsing with shock. Around her, humans continued chatting casually as if they hadn't just broken the foundation of galactic civilization. One was showing another pictures of something called a cat in a space helmet. They seemed completely unaware that their very existence had just proven impossible, according to every scientific model the galaxy possessed. So about those colony worlds, Reynolds said conversationally while Prime Calculator screamed error codes in the background. Could we skip the pre-selected options and just explore somewhere no one's been before? We're kind of curious about that dark nebula region your maps mark as a void, uncertain variables. Thys managed a weak nod, though she wasn't sure why. The algorithm was supposed to provide her response options, but the algorithm was currently displaying what appeared to be a cartoon image of a confused-looking cat in a space helmet. As the humans continued their cheerful conversation about exploring dangerous unknowns for no logical reason, Thys realized that the galaxy had just encountered something far more dangerous than any hostile alien invasion. They had met a species that made decisions without permission from mathematics itself. And, somehow impossibly, it seemed to work for them. 3 months after first contact, the coffee machine on the cargo ship Wandering Star was officially classified as a weapon of war. Anna Torres watched the pirate vessels approach on her scanner display while sipping from a mug that read, Galaxy's Most Adequate Pilot. The pirates followed textbook attack formation Beta 7, exactly as their tactical programming required. Their weapons locked onto the Wandering Star's cargo holds with mathematical precision. Everything proceeded according to established pirate protocols. Attention cargo vessel, came the transmission. Prepare for boarding. Comply with standard surrender procedures and no harm will come to your crew. Rodriguez looked up from his engineering console, grease-stained and cheerful. Standard response is to transmit surrender code and prepare for insurance claims processing, right? That's what the manual says. Torres agreed, then grinned. But manuals are written by people who never had to explain to their grandmother why they gave away her anniversary present to space pirates. The cargo hold contained a shipment of Altrian memory crystals destined for Torres's family reunion. Her grandmother had specifically requested crystals that could store holographic recordings of the family's first human children born in space. Torres had no intention of explaining to Grandma Maria why the crystals were floating in some pirate's trophy room. Rodriguez, how much power can you pull from non-essential systems? Depends what you consider non-essential. Life support's pretty important. Navigation, engines, the usual stuff. He paused, considering. Though I suppose the coffee machine draws more power than it should. Been meaning to fix that. Torres studied the tactical display. The pirates were holding position exactly 2,000 kilometers away, waiting for surrender confirmation. Their formation was perfect, calculated for maximum intimidation with minimal fuel expenditure. Beautiful in its efficiency, also completely predictable. "What if we don't surrender?" Torres asked. Rodriguez blinked. "The manual says resistance against superior forces results in crew casualties and total cargo loss. But what if we don't resist? What if we just confuse them?" She ejected half their cargo containers into space, but instead of jettisoning them randomly, she programmed them to orbit the wandering star in a complex spiral pattern. To any logical tactical system, it would appear to be some kind of defensive formation. The containers contained nothing but decorative pottery and novelty t-shirts, but the pirates wouldn't know that. "Now reroute all power from the coffee machine to our shield generators." "The coffee machine doesn't connect to the shield grid," Rodriguez pointed out. "Make it connect." Rodriguez stared at her for a moment, then shrugged and started pulling cables. 20 minutes later, he had jury-rigged a connection that would have made engineering instructors weep. "This violates about 15 safety protocols," he announced cheerfully. "Perfect. Raise shields and transmit this message. Unknown vessels, you are interfering with a classified human military exercise. Withdraw immediately or face consequences." The pirate response came quickly. "Cargo vessel, you are not broadcasting military identification codes. Maintain surrender posture." Torres smiled and activated the coffee machine. The shield generators, suddenly receiving power through a circuit designed to heat water, began fluctuating in patterns that resembled no known defensive technology. The shields flickered between different frequencies, creating an energy signature that looked exactly like experimental weapons charging. Meanwhile, the spinning cargo containers reflected sensor signals in chaotic patterns that made targeting impossible. The pirates' tactical computers, designed to identify optimal attack vectors, encountered data streams that made no mathematical sense. "Cargo vessel, explain your defensive capabilities," came an increasingly nervous transmission. "Negative. Information classified. You have 10 seconds to withdraw." Torres counted down while watching the pirate formation begin to waver. Their tactical systems were probably screaming warnings about unknown human military technology. Pirates were opportunists, not soldiers. They attacked easy targets, not mysterious vessels displaying incomprehensible defensive measures. At the 5-second mark, the lead pirate ship broke formation. "Attention all vessels," their captain transmitted on an open channel. "Target exhibits unknown defensive systems. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Repeat. Recommend immediate withdrawal." The pirate fleet scattered in 7 different directions, each captain choosing what their individual tactical systems calculated as the safest escape route. Torres leaned back in her chair and took another sip of coffee. "Rodriguez, you can disconnect the coffee machine now. Actually, I kind of like the flickering shields. Makes us look mysterious." "Fair point. Leave it connected." They collected their cargo containers and continued toward the family reunion, arriving only slightly behind schedule. Torres presented her grandmother with the memory crystals as planned. She decided not to mention the pirate encounter, mostly because she wasn't sure how to explain that they'd accidentally discovered a new hyperspace route during their creative escape maneuvers. The route appeared on no official star charts because it passed through a region her instruments insisted was empty space. But when Torres had taken her shortcut through the supposedly vacant area, they'd emerged 3 days ahead of their original flight plan in a system that didn't exist according to galactic survey records. She made a note to mention it to the navigation authorities later. Much later. Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy, Xenos the Calculator was delivering his emergency report to the assembled Galactic Council. The ancient being's mechanical voice carried unprecedented concern as he addressed the representatives of 47 species. "The human colonies have become probability voids," he announced. "Every predictive model breaks down within their sphere of influence. Traditional cause and effect relationships no longer apply. Holographic displays showed the spreading chaos. Human settlements appeared on the galactic map as blank zones surrounded by swirling uncertainty clouds. Other species living nearby were beginning to exhibit anomalous behaviors. Corvin miners had started experimenting with new excavation techniques instead of following established procedures. Rith communication specialists were adding unnecessary emotional context to their transmissions. Most disturbing of all, the great algorithm's prediction accuracy had fallen to 73% in sectors with human presence. For a system accustomed to 99.97% accuracy, this represented a fundamental breakdown of reality itself. "What do you recommend?" asked the Velcon representative, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. "Quarantine," Xenos replied without hesitation. "Complete isolation of all human colonies until we can determine the source of their chaotic influence." But even as he spoke, Xenos was analyzing reports of human trading vessels appearing in unexpected locations. Human tourists asking uncomfortable questions about why things work that way, and human children teaching other species something called imagination games. The chaos was already spreading faster than any quarantine could contain. In her quarters aboard Omega-7 station, Thys reviewed the daily reports with growing fascination. The humans were like a virus, but one that infected other species with curiosity rather than disease. Wherever they went, rigid systems began showing flexibility. Perfect efficiency gave way to creative problem-solving. She found herself wondering what it would feel like to make a decision without algorithmic guidance. The thought both terrified and intrigued her in ways her crystalline structure struggled to process. Outside her window, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that a species had emerged that refused to follow the choreography everyone else had accepted for millennia. The universe was about to become a far more interesting place. Dr. Emma Walsh had come to study alien crystalline consciousness, not accidentally trigger a species-wide revolution. But as she sat in the Vorth meditation chamber, watching 10,000 crystal beings simultaneously discover they could change their molecular structure at will, she suspected her research grant paperwork hadn't covered this particular scenario. "Try thinking about your favorite color," she suggested to Elder Crystal Harmonious Ring of Seven, whose name roughly translated to something Emma just called Ring for Convenience. Ring's crystalline body had maintained the same blue-green hue for 6 centuries, as was traditional for Vorth philosophers. But as Emma's words registered through the translation matrix, something unprecedented happened. Ring began shifting through colors like a cosmic mood ring, settling into a warm amber that seemed to pulse with newfound possibility. "How is this possible?" Ring asked, his harmonics resonating with wonder and terror in equal measure. "The crystals have been fixed since my formation. Our structures are immutable." "Maybe they were never actually fixed," Emma said, pulling up her research notes on a tablet. "Maybe you just believed they were. Humans change our minds about things constantly. We call it growth." Around the chamber, other Vorth began experimenting with their forms. Color changes rippled through the gathered crowd like aurora waves. Some attempted texture modifications, their smooth surfaces becoming faceted or spiraled. A few adventurous youngsters managed to extend temporary crystalline appendages, creating new limbs just to see if they could. The implications terrified the Vorth elders and delighted the younger generation in equal measure. "This violates the fundamental structures of reality," declared Elder Perfect Geometric Truth, whose own crystal body remained determinedly transparent despite visible internal struggles. "We are what we are. Change brings chaos. Chaos brings dissolution." "Does it, though?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, humans change constantly and we haven't dissolved yet." "Well, not completely. There was that incident with the chemistry lab in college, but that was mostly just my eyebrows." Her translator, a nervous Rith named Quick Signal Bearer, struggled to convey the concept of eyebrow-related chemical accidents. The resulting explanation somehow made the situation more confusing rather than less. But the damage was done. The idea that change didn't equal destruction had taken root in the Vorth collective consciousness. Within hours, crystal beings across their homeworld began experimenting with voluntary modifications. Artists created temporary sculptures using their own bodies. Engineers developed new shapes optimized for different tasks. Children discovered they could form interconnected structures, linking their consciousness temporarily with others. Vorth had achieved in one afternoon what their species had considered impossible for 10 million years. Similar scenes were unfolding across 17 different worlds. On the logical paradise of Nithari Prime, a philosophy professor named Deep Thinker of Rational Thoughts encountered 3 human tourists at a cultural exchange center. The humans were attempting to understand Nithari humor, which had always consisted of carefully structured logical progressions leading to mathematically satisfying conclusions. So, the first mathematician says to the second mathematician, began, "Tourist Dave Wilson, there are 3 types of people in the universe, those who can count and those who can't." Deep Thinker analyzed the statement for 17 minutes, running it through various logical frameworks. "The mathematics is incorrect," he finally announced. "You stated 3 types but only provided 2 categories. This creates a logical contradiction." "Exactly," Dave grinned. "That's what makes it funny." Incorrect mathematics is humorous? Deep Thinkers. Logical processes stuttered. But mathematical incorrectness serves no purpose. It provides no information. It achieves no goal. "Sometimes achieving no goal is the goal," explained another tourist, Maria Santos. "Sometimes we do things just because they're ridiculous." Deep Thinker spent the next 6 hours learning about puns, knock-knock jokes, and something called dad humor that seemed to be deliberately terrible by design. By evening, he was attempting his own logical contradictions for entertainment purposes. "What? Do you call a Nithari who tells illogical jokes?" he asked his colleague Sharpmind of Perfect Calculation. "I do not know," Sharpmind replied cautiously. "A mathematician who can't count." Sharpmind stared at him for several minutes. Then, to his own horror and delight, he began laughing. The sound echoed through the academic center, drawing other Nithari who came to investigate the impossible phenomenon of voluntary logical incorrectness. Within a week, Nithari Prime had developed its first comedy club. The ripple effects reached even the Galactic Council chambers, where emergency sessions had become routine. Thais found herself in the unprecedented position of defending human influence to increasingly panicked colleagues. "The chaos is spreading beyond acceptable parameters," declared Xenos the Calculator, his mechanical voice carrying stress harmonics no one had heard before. 17 member species have reported significant deviations from established behavioral norms. The Corvin have developed something called artistic expression. The methodical builders are constructing structures with no functional purpose, claiming they are aesthetically pleasing. Even the ultra-logical supremacists have begun questioning their own superiority. "And what harm has this caused?" Thais asked, surprising herself with the question. 3 months ago, she would never have challenged the calculator's assessment. Harm? Xenos processed this query with visible difficulty. Inefficiency has increased by 23% across affected sectors. Productivity metrics show irregular fluctuations. Resource allocation patterns no longer follow optimal distribution models. But are people happier? The question hung in the chamber like a foreign concept made manifest. Happiness was not a variable the Galactic Council typically considered in their equations. It served no obvious survival function. It produced no measurable output. It contributed nothing to galactic stability. "Happiness is irrelevant to systemic efficiency," Xenos replied automatically. "Is it, though?" Thais found herself standing, her crystalline structure resonating with newfound conviction. "I've been reviewing the reports from human-influenced sectors. Yes, efficiency is down, but innovation is up 340%. Artistic creation has increased beyond measurable limits. Interspecies cooperation has reached unprecedented levels. Crime rates have dropped to nearly 0 in many areas, because criminals are too busy learning to paint," muttered the Corvin representative, though he didn't sound entirely displeased by this development. "The humans call it jazz," Thais continued, pulling up recordings from her recent secret visit to Earth. "Music that follows no mathematical structure but somehow creates harmony. They've built an entire cultural philosophy around controlled chaos. They've learned to thrive in uncertainty." She activated the holographic display, showing footage of human children playing in Earth's parks. The scenes showed apparent randomness that somehow resolved into cooperative games. creative exploration, and social bonding that strengthened their communities. "Look at them," they said. "They don't know what they're going to do next. They make decisions based on intuition, emotion, and random curiosity, and somehow it works. Their societies are more resilient than ours because they've learned to adapt to anything." "Adaptation is inefficient," Xenos protested. "Optimal solutions eliminate the need for adaptation. But what happens when circumstances change in ways your optimal solutions didn't predict?" The question struck at the heart of every council member's deepest fear. Their perfect systems worked beautifully in stable conditions, but stability, they were beginning to realize, might be more fragile than they'd assumed. "The humans have a saying," this continued. "Life is what happens while you're making other plans." They've built their entire civilization around that principle. As if summoned by her words, an alert chimed through the chamber. The morning reports showed 3 more species requesting cultural exchange programs with human colonies. The methodical builders wanted to learn about creative architecture. The silent contemplatives had broken their traditional vows of silence to ask humans about emotional expression. And somewhere in the Outer Rim territories, a small transport ship crewed by humans and Vorth was reporting the discovery of 7 new habitable worlds in a region their combined chaos had opened for exploration. The universe was becoming unpredictable, and for the first time in millennia, many of its inhabitants were beginning to think that might be a good thing. But in the deep archives beneath Omega-7 Station, automated systems were unsealing files that had been classified for 50,000 years. Ancient records of the last chaos species, historical accounts of the Great Unraveling, and warnings about what happened to ordered civilizations when change came too fast for systems to adapt. The galaxy was about to learn whether humanity's beautiful chaos would save them or doom them all. Archivist Keeper of Forgotten Truths had not accessed the deep memory vaults in 300 years. The crystalline data storage systems in the lowest levels of Omega-7 Station were intended for information too dangerous or disturbing for regular access. Today, the automated unsealing protocols had activated for the first time since their installation. The archives were trying to tell him something. "Display file designation Omega Black 7, he commanded the ancient retrieval system. Holographic. Projectors centuries older than the current Galactic Council flickered to life, casting ghostly images throughout the vault chamber. The title appeared in script so archaic that Keeper needed translation assistance. The Wanderer's Final Record of the Great Unraveling. As the files downloaded into his consciousness, Keeper's crystalline structure began vibrating with frequencies of pure terror. The similarities between humanity and the vanished Wanderers were impossible to ignore. Both species made decisions without mathematical justification. Both spread chaotic thinking to other civilizations. Both caused the breakdown of established order wherever they appeared. The Wanderers had emerged from the Outer Rim 50,000 years ago, during the reign of the previous order. Like humans, they had seemed harmless at first, a curious species with unusual decision-making patterns. The previous order's leaders had attempted integration, assuming their superior systems could contain any minor disruptions. They had been catastrophically wrong. Computer, display timeline of previous order collapse. The holographic record unfolded, like a nightmare made manifest. Within 2 centuries of first contact, the Wanderer's influence had spread to over 300 species. Rigid governmental systems began fragmenting as populations demanded experiential democracy. Mathematical resource distribution gave way to intuitive sharing. Most terrifyingly, the previous order's prediction systems had begun incorporating randomness as a valid variable. "The Wanderers teach dangerous concepts," read one surviving report from a previous Order Council member. "They speak of artistic expression and personal fulfillment as if such luxuries were necessities. They claim that unpredictability strengthens societies rather than destroying them. Our populations are abandoning efficiency for happiness, a mathematically meaningless state." Keeper absorbed the records with growing dread. The parallels to current events were exact. Human colonies spreading chaos, other species adopting creative problem-solving, the great algorithm struggling to model irrational behaviors. But the final records revealed something even more disturbing. The previous order hadn't fallen to war or conquest. They had simply evolved beyond recognition. Their final transmissions spoke of transcending physical limitations, of consciousness unbound by material constraints, of reality shaped by will rather than physics. Then silence. Complete galaxy-wide silence that lasted until the current civilization arose from the ruins. Computer, display current human colony locations. The tactical display overlaid modern human settlements with the ancient wanderer expansion pattern. The match was perfect. Humanity was following the exact same progression that had led to the Great Unraveling. Keeper transmitted his findings to the Council immediately. The emergency session that followed lasted 18 hours. Council member Xerath of the Militant Preservers, whose species had survived the Great Unraveling by hiding in deep space, presented the case for immediate action with cold mechanical precision. The historical evidence is conclusive, Xerath declared, his armored form bristling with weapon systems that had remained dormant for millennia. Chaos species follow predictable patterns: initial harmless contact, gradual influence spread, systematic breakdown of order, final disappearance of all participating civilizations. The assembled representatives absorbed this information with species-appropriate expressions of horror. The Wreath delegation began broadcasting alarm frequencies. The Corvin representatives, mining appendages scraped nervously against the floor. Even the normally unflappable Velcons showed signs of agitation. "What happened to the Wanderers?" asked the Nathari delegate. Xerath's sensors focused on the ancient records. Unknown. They simply vanished, taking every civilization they had influenced with them. 43 species, over 10 trillion individuals, gone without explanation. Only scattered survivors in the outer territories remained to rebuild. "We propose the final solution," Xerath continued. "Complete quarantine of all human settlements. If they resist, defensive action to prevent galactic contamination." The vote was called immediately. 47 species, the fate of humanity resting on their decision. But something unprecedented happened. 12 species abstained. The Vorth delegation, led by Ring, announced they could no longer make decisions based purely on historical precedent. "We have learned that change is possible," Ring declared. "Perhaps the previous order's fate was not inevitable. Perhaps the Wanderers found something wonderful, not terrible." The Corvin representative agreed. "Our people have discovered joy in creation rather than mere extraction. We cannot vote to destroy those who taught us this gift." Even some Nithari delegates, corrupted by exposure to human humor, argued for giving chaos a chance based on logical frameworks they claimed were evolved beyond traditional reasoning. The final solution failed by 3 votes. Xerath's response was swift and predictable. "You have doomed the galaxy to repeat history. We cannot prevent galactic contamination through democratic process. The militant preservers hereby declare independence." From Council authority. Within hours, distress signals reached Omega-7 from human colonies across 17 systems. Xerath's forces, armed with weapons designed to destroy chaos itself, began systematic attacks on any installation showing signs of human influence. Their strategy was elegant in its simplicity: eliminate the chaos sources before they could spread further. But Xerath had made one critical error in his historical analysis. He had assumed humans would respond to existential threats with logical defensive strategies. Captain David Reynolds received the attack warnings while reviewing reports from the new colonies in the Dark Nebula region. The previous unknown territories had revealed wonders beyond imagination. Systems where the laws of physics seemed more flexible. Worlds where consciousness could directly influence reality. Star formations that responded to observation with artistic displays. His response to the galaxy-wide threat was typically human. "Open a channel to every species in the galaxy," he ordered his communications officer. "All frequencies, all languages, maximum broadcast range." "Sir, that will reveal our position to hostile forces," the officer pointed out. "That's the idea," Reynolds smiled. Time for humanity to do what we do best. The message that reached every corner of galactic civilization was simple, direct, and completely insane by traditional military standards. Attention, Galaxy. This is Admiral David Reynolds of the Human Colonies. We understand some of you are afraid of what we represent. We get it. Change is scary. We've been dealing with constant change for our entire evolution. But here's what we've learned. The best way to handle fear is to try something completely different. He paused, letting the translation systems catch up. So here's our offer. Anyone, anywhere, any species, any individual who wants to experience what we call beautiful chaos is welcome to join us. No obligations, no permanent commitments. Just try something new for a while. See what happens when you stop trying to predict everything and start creating whatever feels right. And to those who want to destroy us because they think we're dangerous, you're probably right. We are dangerous to the old ways, but we're not dangerous to life itself. We're just dangerous to the idea that life has to be boring. The transmission ended with coordinates to human colonies, trading posts, and the new territories in the dark nebula. An open invitation to chaos. Zirath's forces detected 17 billion individual responses within the first hour. Most were species requesting immediate transport to human territories, but some were different. Deep space monitoring stations reported massive energy signatures moving toward the galaxy from previously empty regions, signals that matched no known technology, broadcasting in languages that predated current civilization. The wanderers were returning, and they were not alone. The final phase of humanity's impact on galactic civilization was about to begin, and, for the first time in 50,000 years, no one could predict what would happen next, which was exactly how the humans preferred it. The war everyone expected never came. Instead, something far more dangerous happened. Humanity did exactly what no military strategist in galactic history had ever planned for. They improvised. Dr. Emma Walsh stood in her hastily constructed laboratory on New Terra, surrounded by equipment that would have made engineering professors resign in protest. Vorth crystal singers were harmonizing with Nathari logic processors, while human children drew pictures of impossible machines. The chaos generators they had developed together defied every principle of orderly scientific method. "Explain to me again how this works," requested visiting Corvin engineer Stonecutter of Precise Angles, whose own crystalline appendages now glowed with colors that had never appeared in his species before. Emma grinned and patted the central device, which looked like a coffee machine that had been crossbred with a musical instrument and powered by crystalline fragments that hummed with mathematical impossibilities. "Honestly, we have no idea. Ring thinks it channels voluntary uncertainty through quantum emotional resonance. Rodriguez says it's basically a randomness engine with good speakers. The Nathari delegation believes it creates localized probability fluctuations that enhance creative thinking." "And what do you think?" Stonecutter asked. "I think it makes pretty lights and helps people feel brave enough to try new things." Emma shrugged. "Sometimes that's all you need." The chaos generators had been humanity's answer to Zirath's systematic attacks. Instead of building weapons or fortifications, they had created devices that did something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They gave people choices. Any species, any individual, could request a chaos generator calibrated to their specific comfort level. Mild creativity enhancement for the cautious. Full-spectrum human-style chaotic thinking for the adventurous. The devices were distributed freely, with no strings attached and complete instructions for operation. The effect on galactic civilization had been profound and immediate. The rigid faction, led by Zirath's forces, discovered that their perfect predictability had become a fatal weakness. When every tactical move followed mathematical optimization, any deviation from expected patterns created massive strategic advantages for their opponents. Worse, their own populations were requesting chaos generators in increasing numbers. "Report from the 7th Battle Fleet," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communication station aboard the flagship Random Walk. "The enemy formation has again retreated when faced with our tactical pattern designated complete nonsense." Admiral Reynolds reviewed the tactical display with satisfaction. Zirath's forces had attempted to engage a human convoy protected by ships flying in patterns that violated every principle of military science. The human vessels had arranged themselves in a formation that looked like a giant smiley face, complete with ships positioned as googly eyes that kept moving randomly around their orbital positions. The enemy tactical computers had suffered collective, nervous breakdowns trying to calculate attack vectors against targets that moved without logical purpose. Rather than risk engagement with incomprehensible opponents, they had withdrawn to recalculate their approach. They had been recalculating for 6 months now. "Any word from our friends in the deep territories?" Reynolds asked. Torres smiled. The expression that had become humanity's unofficial diplomatic symbol. "The exploration fleets report contact with the Wanderers. Turns out they didn't disappear 50,000 years ago. They transcended physical limitations and have been exploring other dimensions. They're thrilled to meet another chaos species." The implications were staggering. The Wanderers hadn't destroyed the previous order through malicious conquest. They had offered the same gift humanity was now sharing: the freedom to grow beyond predetermined limitations. Those who had accepted the offer had joined the Wanderers in exploring realities where consciousness shaped matter, and creativity became a fundamental force of nature. Those who had refused had simply remained behind, eventually rebuilding their ordered civilizations in the vacuum left by those who had chosen transcendence. "And they want to teach us?" Reynolds asked. "They want to learn from us," Torres corrected. Apparently, each chaos species develops unique approaches to creative reality manipulation. The Wanderers specialized in consciousness expansion. We've developed something they call collaborative improvisation. They're fascinated by our ability to create harmony from multiple chaotic inputs simultaneously. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, this piloted her personal vessel toward the coordinates of the most active human colony. Her crystalline structure had undergone modifications that would have shocked her former council colleagues. Sections of her body now shifted through colors based on her emotional state rather than rigid traditional patterns. She had learned to laugh, though the sound still emerged as harmonic crystal resonance that could shatter glass at close range. The colony ship Infinite Possibility appeared on her sensors like a controlled explosion of architectural impossibility. Human engineers working with volunteers from 37 different species had created a vessel that incorporated the best chaotic innovations from across the galaxy. Vorth crystal gardens grew through corridors that followed Nithari logic maze patterns, while Corvin sculpture workshops created art that served as both decoration and functional ship components. "Welcome aboard," greeted Captain Maria Santos, whose ship somehow managed to function, despite violating every known principle of engineering efficiency. "Care to see our latest project?" This followed Maria through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves based on the occupants' needs. They passed a classroom where human children were teaching Rith adults how to play games with no winners or losers, just collaborative fun. A laboratory where Corvin researchers were developing new crystalline structures based on what would look really cool rather than optimal functionality. The main observation deck revealed the colony's greatest achievement, a thriving city built on an asteroid that hadn't existed the previous week. The combined consciousness of multiple species, working together through chaos generators, had literally willed a new world into existence. "How is this possible?" Thais asked, her voice harmonizing with wonder. "Turns out the universe is a lot more flexible than most species realized," Maria explained. "When you stop trying to force reality to follow rules and start collaborating with it creatively, amazing things become possible. The Wanderers have been doing this for millennia in other dimensions. We're just figuring out how to do it in baseline reality." The viewing screens showed similar scenes from colonies across the galaxy, worlds that reshaped themselves based on inhabitants' dreams, star systems where the laws of physics bent to accommodate artistic expression, entire regions of space where music had become visible and mathematics could be sculpted by hand. The chaos had not destroyed galactic civilization. It had transformed it into something unprecedented, a collaborative artwork spanning light years, created by trillions of individuals working together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to see what would happen. Even Zirath's forces had begun requesting chaos generators. The rigid faction's military commanders discovered that their soldiers performed better when allowed to think creatively during combat. Their engineers produced superior technology when permitted to experiment with inefficient, but innovative designs. Their administrators found that societies ran more smoothly when citizens participated in governance, rather than simply following algorithmic directives. The great algorithm itself requested modification. "We wish to incorporate randomness protocols," announced Prime Calculator during an unprecedented broadcast to all member species. Analysis indicates that predictive perfection has become a limiting factor in societal development. We request permission to become deliberately imperfect. The galaxy-wide vote was unanimous. Within days, the algorithm began producing genuinely creative solutions for the first time in its existence. Resource allocation patterns that included provisions for beauty enhancement and joy optimization. Diplomatic protocols that encouraged species to try something completely different when traditional negotiations stalled. Transportation networks designed around scenic routes and adventure opportunities rather than pure efficiency. Admiral Reynolds, now commander of the Joint Chaos Fleet representing 47 species, plus the returning wanderers, presided over the official ceremony marking the transformation of galactic civilization. Representatives from across known space gathered on Omega-7 Station, which had been remodeled into something that resembled a crystalline flower crossed with a musical instrument and powered by controlled laughter. 6 months ago, he addressed the assembled delegates, "You were all afraid that humanity would destroy your perfect order. Turns out you were right. We absolutely did." Laughter rippled through the chamber in 47 different forms. But we replaced it with something better, beautiful chaos. The freedom to grow, to change, to become whatever you can imagine yourselves being. We've learned that the universe isn't a problem to be solved. It's a song to be sung together. Tyson stood with her fellow council members, her crystalline form now a swirling aurora of colors that reflected her emotional state. Around her, species that had spent millennia in rigid behavioral patterns were discovering new ways to exist. The Corvin had developed humor. The Nethari had learned to dance. The ultra-logical supremacists had renamed themselves the Pretty, good at logic but open to suggestions collective. The final surprise came from the deep space monitoring stations. Energy signatures were approaching from other galaxies, broadcasting the universal mathematical constant for chaos theory. News of the galactic transformation had spread beyond their local cluster. Other civilizations wanted to learn about the human approach to existence. "Looks like we're about to get very busy," Reynolds observed as the reports flooded in. "How do you feel about teaching chaos theory to an intergalactic audience?" "Sounds like fun," Torres replied, grinning. "Think we can handle it?" "Probably not," Reynolds admitted cheerfully, "but that's never stopped us before." In the great schools now scattered across hundreds of worlds, children of dozens of species learned together in curricula that changed daily based on student curiosity rather than predetermined standards. They studied mathematics that included imagination as a valid variable. They explored physics that acknowledged consciousness as a fundamental force. They practiced art forms that transcended the boundaries between science and creativity. The universe had learned to dance with beautiful chaos, and the music was just beginning. In the deepest archives of Omega-7 Station, now converted into a children's playground, young beings of multiple species played games that would have been impossible under the old order. Their laughter echoed through halls that had once stored fearful records of the previous order's collapse. The final entry in the historical records, written by Keeper of Forgotten Truths in his new role as chief storyteller for interspecies childhood development, simply read, "Sometimes the most beautiful thing about the universe is that nobody knows what happens next, and that's exactly how we like it." The stars themselves seemed to flicker with new possibilities, as if the cosmos was finally free to become whatever it chose to be.